welcome back to Religion and Crime Collide. Today's case is going to have you questioning whether you should really trust those people that you look up to. To get into today's case, I'm going to give you just a reminder that I do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. This is the third week, so there will be no case next week, but then there will be a case after that. So remember, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Also, trigger warning, this case does cover a pretty gruesome murder and some dismemberment, so if either of those topics are too much for you, skip this video and I will see you in the next one. Now, this case starts on June 16th, 1987, just after midnight, when the fire department is called to Emmanuel Church of Christ at 522 Woodland Street in Nashville, Tennessee. The church is currently engulfed in flames, and so the fire department spends hours trying to get this fire under control. By the next morning, they are able to get the fire under control and put it out. Now, investigators need to go into the church and figure out how the heck this fire got started. Was it an accident? Was it on purpose? As they enter the church, it doesn't take them long to realize that this fire was set on purpose. First off, they smell gasoline. Anytime you smell gasoline, most of the time it's going to be a fire that was set on purpose. Also, it's a church. A church shouldn't smell like gasoline. Not only that, but they saw clearly in between the two aisles of pews, there were clear pour marks of gasoline. So now they know that the fire was most likely set intentionally. But why? What was it trying to hide? Is it insurance fraud? So they keep investigating, but they're not finding anything in the church. That is, until they go to the attic. When they get into the attic, they see that there is a huge pile of debris. Some rolled up carpet, some 2x4s, some extra pieces of wood and trash. That it's just a lot of stuff sitting here. And beside this pile are 2 empty gas cans. Not only that, in the attic is a window. And for the fire department to put out the fire, they ended up breaking through that window and shooting the stream of water through that window, and it was landing on this pile of debris. Now you can call that coincidence or you can call that fate. Either one. But police are thinking that this pile of debris is a little suspicious. So they start to remove some of the wood and stuff on top. That is until they get to the carpet. Now this carpet had been rolled up, but they realize that this carpet looks a little lumpy. So they unroll it and they find a dead body. Not only is this a dead body, but it is a dismembered dead body. It's missing the head. It is missing the lower right forearm. It is missing patches of skin around the shoulders. It is stripped down to its underwear, and it is wearing a belt. No pants, just underwear and a belt, and the belt has a letter T on it. Now, the pastor of this church was a man named John David Terry. So the investigators end up going to the wife of the pastor. Her name is Brenda, and they tell her about the belt. They describe it to her and ask her if she knows anything about it. Brenda breaks down hysterically because she knows that belt. She knows that belt very well. That is John David Terry's belt, and she had given it to him for Father's Day the year prior. Not only that, she had no idea where John David Terry was. The last time she had spoke and seen him, he was actually supposed to be going on a fishing trip with 32-year-old James Matheny. But nobody could get a hold of John David Terry, and nobody could get a hold of James Matheny. So at this point, the police are assuming that the dead body upstairs is that of Brother James. Everyone called him Brother James, so we were going to address him as Brother James in this story moving forward. Now, James Matheny lived alone at this time. His ex-wife went over to his apartment to see if anything looked out of the sorts, and it didn't. Nothing was ransacked. Everything looked like it was in its place. The only thing that was missing was James Matheny himself. Now, the police are interrogating and investigating all of the members of the congregation and the community, trying to figure out why somebody would kill Brother James. Everybody had no idea why somebody would kill him. He had no grudges with anybody. There was no rumors of him being in any kind of illegal activity. He was labeled as somebody who was kind and passionate and was an amazing man of God who loved his congregation deeply. The fact that he was murdered was shocking to everybody in the congregation and within the community. But on the other hand, they started to find out that James Matheny had been struggling for some time. He had been an alcoholic, and this became so much for his wife and their 4-year-old son that she decided to leave him a handful of months prior to this. Now, about 3 or 4 months prior to this event happening, James Matheny had hit rock bottom, and he ends up calling Teresa, his ex-wife, and asks her to reach out to her pastor and see if that he would be willing to help James Matheny get back on track and just pull his life together. So Teresa calls Brother James, and Brother James actually tells her, "Oh, I've been thinking about him lately. Of course I will go see him." After that, Brother Terry takes James under his wing and helps him get his life back on track. He hired him as the second handyman at the church. He even baptized him. He would do counseling sessions with him. He got him into housing and paid 6 weeks of it to help him get back up on his feet. Teresa told police that James actually looked up to Brother Terry as if he was a father figure. So now the police are confused. What's the motive for him to kill Brother James? It wasn't making sense for anybody. But they still needed to find James, and so they ended up putting out an APB for him. And this fire started at the church Monday night going into the wee hours of Tuesday morning. Now, by Tuesday night, they end up locating Brother Terry's car. It had been abandoned about 250 feet away from James Matheny's apartment. Now, when they get into the vehicle and they start searching it, they end up finding a couple beer bottles. They end up finding some of Brother Terry's identification cards, and they end up finding a bloody rag that had been stuffed under the front seat of the vehicle. This is when James Matheny goes from person of interest to prime suspect. Now, as they are canvassing and interviewing people that lived around Emmanuel Church of Christ, they end up finding somebody that says on Monday night prior to the fire starting, they had seen somebody parked behind the church on a motorcycle with their headlights on. So the police decide that they are going to try to find somebody that either goes to the church or is related to somebody that goes to the church that owns a motorcycle. But before they can go down the rabbit hole of investigating this piece of information, they end up getting some shocking information from the medical examiner. As she's doing an autopsy of the body found in the church, she realizes that this body has some scarring that doesn't match up to Brother Terry's medical records. The only other person in this story that's missing is James Matheny. So the police end up going to James Matheny's family and talking about his different medical procedures that he may have had. And things are starting to line up in the police's mind that this body might be James Matheny. So the family of James Matheny gives over his medical records, and they start comparing the dead body to James Matheny's medical records and realize that this body is not Brother Terry. It's James Matheny. Now, police go to Brenda, Brother Terry's wife, and tell her what they find. She, of course, is relieved that this is not her husband dead in the attic of the church, but she's also confused. Where is he? Why did this happen? Who did it? She still has just as many questions as everybody else in this situation. In these kinds of circles, things spread fast, and the rumors going around the town and in the congregation at this time is that either somebody broke in and killed James Matheny and then kidnapped Brother Terry, and that it was probably cult related. Because if Brother Terry is missing, then this is the only way for this to make sense, because there's no way that Brother Terry could have killed James Matheny. He's a pastor. That just doesn't happen in their minds. 2 and 2 don't make 4. So it was a robbery gone wrong and he was kidnapped, or it was occult related, or both. Now, police end up getting a tip that there is a storage unit that they need to go and get some evidence from that is related to this case, and they need to go get it within 2 to 3 hours. 2 to 3 hours. This was a tip that was called in. Now, from my research, I was not able to find who called this in and if they even ever found out who called this in and why. But they end up going to this storage unit, and when they open this storage unit, they find a motorcycle. So they make the connection that most likely this motorcycle is the motorcycle that the person that lived near the church had seen parked behind the church the night of the fire. So they decide to track this motorcycle to try to see who it is registered to or who bought it, and they end up tracking it back to a dealership. Now, when they get to the dealership tells them that this motorcycle was actually sold to a man named Jerry Malam. So the police decide to search Jerry Malam's name, but at first, nothing comes up in their database, so they have to dig a little bit deeper into public records. Now, it takes them just a little bit, but they end up finding a hit on Jerry Malam. But this makes the entire investigation 10 times more confusing because Jerry Malam was a dead 7-year-old who had died in a fishing accident by drowning. Now police are like, well, okay, somebody has stolen this dead 7-year-old's identity. It was in the 80s, so it was pretty easy to steal an identity back in the 80s because you could just like send in a letter or apply for a birth certificate of somebody just by knowing like their name and their date of birth. You didn't have to like prove identification in order to get one. So just by somebody knowing this kid's name and date of birth, they were able to get his birth certificate very easily. Now, just after they make this discovery, they get notified from the local intelligence department that Brother Terry was located. He was at Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. So immediately, investigators go to Nashville and go to Vanderbilt Hospital. They're already in Nashville. They go to Vanderbilt Hospital and they want to talk with Brother Terry. Now, when investigators see Brother Terry for the very first time, they are shocked. They said they would have walked by him in public and not known it was him because he looked so different. Normally, Brother Terry wore a toupee. This is something everybody knew that he wore. But now, not only was he not wearing a toupee, but he was shaved, completely bald, shaved his head. He had trimmed his eyebrows, and he was sporting a tan, but also he was covered in bruises. So investigators tried to talk with Brother Terry, but he says that he's not allowed to talk to them. So the investigators ask, why can't you talk to us? And he says, because my lawyer told me not to. Now, because of all of this information, the police are granted a search warrant for Brother Terry's home. Now, when they go and do the search warrant at his house, they end up finding $10,000 in the top drawer of his dresser, and they're only able to locate 3 out of the 4 guns that are registered to Brother Terry's name. Now, I'm not sure when this search went down. I'm assuming that it happened after Brother Terry got out of the hospital and made it home, because that, in my head, is the only reason why the $10,000 was in the house, in his dresser, and not with him personally. That's my assumption, but I was never able to, put the timeline specifically together at this point. But they end up approaching Brother Terry and asking him where this 4th gun is of his. It was his .38 caliber gun and it's missing. And Brother Terry just says he got rid of it. Now, with his lawyer's permission, he ends up confessing to killing James Matheny, but he says it was all in self-defense. So he says they went to the church, they were preparing to go on their fishing trip when they were in the attic, and he made a comment about James Matheny's drinking, and that enraged James. So he ends up attacking Brother Terry with a 2x4. So he has to defend himself, and that's how James Matheny dies. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never heard of a self-defense case, and I listen to a lot of true crime. I've never heard of a self-defense case where somebody loses a head and part of their forearm and gets skin on their body sliced off. Never heard of that before. So, red flag? Red flag? And if you're agreeing with me right now, so are the police. They are not believing this story that Brother Terry is spitting out. But they also can't find a motive of why Brother Terry would kill James. That is, until they look into the church finances and realize that Brother Terry had been embezzling large sums of money from the church for a while now. So I think at this point, the police investigators are just okay, most likely, James Matheny probably found out about the embezzlement and Brother Terry killed him to silence him. I think that's probably what their assumption was, and so they present all of the information that they have gathered to a grand jury, and within just a few short hours, they have a warrant for the arrest of John David Terry for the murder of James Matheny. Now remember, this is in the 80s, so at the peak or maybe even the beginning of satanic panic kind of times. So it was really much easier for the congregation to be there's no way he murdered him. There's no way. It had to be occult related, and that was the biggest belief at the time. And from what I have heard, that there are still people within that community that believe that this had to have been occult related in some way, shape, or form. It's too hard for them to put together that a pastor would murder somebody within their congregation. They can't, spiritually, those two just can't connect for them. So still to this day, people think that it's occult related. Now, the congregation is really split during this time, but the head bishop over the entire denomination ends up making a statement and says that they stand with Brother Terry and they believe that he is innocent until proven guilty, but they want the truth, even if the truth means that Brother Terry is a murderer. Now let's talk about John David Terry and who he is. So he grew up within the Emmanuel Church of Christ denomination his whole life, and at the time of this crime, he was actually the associate bishop overseer of the denomination, and he was a pastor of one of their locations, the one in Nashville. He was a husband, and he was a father to 3 sons. He was loved not only by his family, but his congregation. Many of his congregation said that they felt blessed to have him as their pastor because he was so attentive to detail and attentive to all of his members. He would help and disciple when needed. He would counsel his members. He was an amazing pastor, and they just felt loved and cherished by him. Now, since we know that Brother Terry did murder James Matheny, let's get into the real timeline of events and what led him up to commit this crime. Investigators end up finding out all of this information through more investigation and more interviewing of Brother Terry, where he finally confesses and tells the true story and line of events of how this happened. Now, let's talk about what led up to this crime. So in 1983, Brother Terry's mom died. Many have stated that his mom was like his only confidant. So when she died, it broke Terry. Not only did it break Terry just like having her not there, but I think her death made him like kind of have to face the impending death of him in the future. And it made him realize that he was very unhappy with where his life was at. He was overwhelmed by everything and just felt like a complete failure. So he tried to shake it up, and he ended up, I think, going part-time selling some like aluminum siding. That didn't help. He still felt like a failure. He still felt overwhelmed by life. And this got so bad that he even contemplated committing suicide many times. Now, the year after his mom died in 1984 is when we find out that he started to misappropriate funds at the church. He is still depressed. He is still overwhelmed by everything. And this goes on for a few years. And he decides that, he's not going to kill himself. He is actually going to change his identity. And how he came up with this idea was one day in 1987, he is reading the magazine Soldier of Fortune when he comes across an ad that is talking about like how to disappear or how to start a new life. And he decides that's the perfect idea. So his plan was to stage his own death and run away and start a new life, just to get a fresh start on everything. So he orders the book that the, ad is going on. Now we're assuming that the most likely book that he ordered was one that's called The Paper Trip. This was a common book pamphlet thing that was written in the 80s. And so I am assuming that that is the one that he ordered and got all this information from. Funnily enough, I have a case that I'm covering next month that we're going to talk about this exact book again. So Brother Terry gets his book in the mail, and he starts learning how to change his identity. Through his embezzlement of funds from the church, he ends up stealing $5,000 to buy the motorcycle, and then he keeps $10,000 in cash to help him on his journey. Now, at first, Brother Terry tried to assume the identity of a dead childhood friend, but he was unable to get documents, so that's when he started looking at the local obituaries in his town, and that's when he found the death of 7-year-old Jerry Milan, who had drowned. So he decides that that's the identity he's going to steal because their date of births were very similar. So I think that was just easier for him to remember the date of birth and not get confused. So he chose Jerry Milan. So knowing Jerry's name and his date of birth, he was able to get his birth certificate. And then Brother Terry ended up forging a baptismal certificate. And with the birth certificate and the baptismal certificate, he was able to get a driver's license, a social security card, a fictitious mailing address, and was able to get the motorcycle under his name. Now you're probably thinking, how was he able to get a social security number? So nowadays, those numbers are assigned to us at birth. But back in the 80s, they actually were assigned, but you actually didn't get them until you started to work. So when you started to get your own job, you would apply for your social security number and then they would issue it to you. So it was very normal to be applying for a social security number later in life. Now, Brother Terry says that his plan at first was to just plan some kind of robbery hoax and then leave some blood around and to have James Matheny come in and be the one to find it. And then set off the alarm bells that something had happened and now Brother Terry's missing and what's going on. But we find out later at trial that Brother Terry actually confesses at trial, admits that he had been thinking about killing Matheny for a while. So in my opinion, he probably just said this to try to garner some sympathy and be like, well, that wasn't my plan at first to kill him. But then confesses at trial to be like, oh, yeah, I was kind of thinking about it for a while. So here's my question. Why did he choose this route? a fake death, because it seems like it would just be easier to just up and disappear. So I'm not sure if his reasoning behind this was to bring his family some closure, because it would be easier for them to cope with the fact that he's dead and something tragic happened, than him just choosing willingly to uproot his life and run away from them. I'm also not sure if it was like some kind of life insurance policy. I had heard rumors that there was like $100,000 life insurance policy in the case of his death. So he was wanting his family to get that money to kind of like set them up for a while. I was never able to like conclusively approve that. So I don't know. And we don't know. We don't have answers to that. And a few other things as well I'll get into. Now, the day of the murder was June 15th. It was a Monday, so June 15th, 1987. And James Matheny and Brother Terry are supposed to be going on a fishing trip that lasts a handful of days. So Brother Terry ends up going to James Matheny's house and picks him up, and they end up going to the church together. When they get to the church, Brother Terry gives James the keys to the car and some credit cards, and he tells him, go and fill up the car with some gas and then come back. Brother Terry stays at the church and he's making some phone calls. He says while he's sitting there making some phone calls, after about 30 minutes, he hears a noise. So he leaves the room to go investigate, and that's when he sees the stairs to the attic open. So he goes up to the attic to investigate, and there in the attic, he had stashed a bag with some stuff in it and his .38 caliber pistol. He goes over to get the pistol, and he sees that it is James Matheny in the attic, and he decides this is the time I'm going to take out my plan, and he shoots Matheny in the head. Now, I and many others believe that the series of events that he says happened right here are very different. Even prosecutors at trial said that they think these events happened differently. Now, they think that Brother Terry lured James into the attic by saying like there was some kind of work that needed to be done up there. And so as James is going up into the attic, Brother Terry is following right behind him. And then that's when he gets his gun and then shoots him in the back of his head. So this was planned all along, is what prosecutors are saying. And personally, I believe that too. Brother Terry says that this was not the plan. He denies this theory. And he says that he feels like James Matheny was going to reveal his escape plot, and so that's why he had to kill him. So what is it? Did James Matheny know about this? Was he part of the escape plot? Was he trying to help you? Or did he just like stumble upon you like making this plan to escape and start a new life, and so you had to kill him? Or was he the victim of a heinous crime and knew nothing about it? What is it? We don't know. Honestly, to this day, we still don't know. In my opinion, James Matheny knew nothing about what was about to happen to him. He was just a victim, and Brother Terry took advantage of his desperation for like trying to get his life back on track and his deep trust of Brother Terry. Now, after he shoots Matheny in the back of the head, he ends up cutting off his head and his right forearm. He then undresses Matheny down to his underwear and then takes his belt and puts it on Matheny's body. He then takes the body parts that he dismembered, the head and the forearm, and he puts it in one bag, and then he takes Matheny's clothes and he puts it in another. Brother Terry then leaves the body in the attic and drives away from the church. He ends up dumping the bag of clothes, a hacksaw, and a knife that he used to dismember the body into a dumpster. He then goes to a store and buys 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline and goes and fills them up. Next, he drives to the mini warehouse where his motorcycle was hidden, and he ends up dropping off the body parts, but then drives to the church in his car still and drops off the 2 gas cans that he's going to use to start the fire later. After that, he leaves the church and he drives his car over to Matheny's apartment, and he abandons his car about 250 feet away from Matheny's apartment. But before he abandons it, he leaves some stuff inside. He leaves some beer bottles. He leaves some of his credit cards. And he even leaves a towel smeared in his own blood. How did he get his blood on this towel? He had withdrawn some of his blood the night before. So if this was just oops, I killed him kind of thing, why was it planned out in such detail? And this isn't even it. He had taken the hand, the forearm that he had cut off of Matheny, and he had used it to put Matheny's fingerprints on the beer bottles and on his credit cards. This was massively planned out. He even walked to James Matheny's apartment, went inside, and left his own wallet in James Matheny's apartment, further trying to frame him. This was premeditated. Oh my gosh, premeditated. After he leaves James Matheny's apartment, he ends up taking a taxi cab back to his mini warehouse. At the warehouse, he ends up getting his motorcycle and the bag of body parts and ends up driving to Kentucky Lake, where he ends up renting some kind of like paddle boat or something. And he goes out onto the lake and he ties a weight to the bag of body parts and he throws it overboard. He then leaves Kentucky Lake, drives back to the church, and now it is well after dark, and he ends up cutting off the areas of the shoulder, the skin. He had sliced it off of James Matheny's shoulders because James Matheny had tattoos there, so he was trying to get them gone so that he couldn't be easily identified. He takes those pieces of skin and he flushes them down the toilet. He then takes James Matheny's body, rolls it up into some carpet, creates that big debris pile, and after 2 failed attempts, he ends up finally lighting the church on fire and driving off. Brother Terry ends up fleeing to Memphis, Tennessee, where he pays for 2 nights at a little motel hotel thing. And he actually only ends up staying 1 night, but during this night, he ends up deciding to work on trying to change his appearance. That's when he shaves his head, he trims his eyebrows, and does some kind of weird fake tan thing. And then the next day, he decides he's going to attend a minor league baseball game. As if he didn't just brutally murder and dismember a man the day before. Then on June 17th, apparently Brother Terry couldn't take it anymore and he decided to throw his .38 caliber pistol in the Mississippi River and call his lawyer, and he came back to Nashville, Tennessee. Brother Terry said that he knew he was in trouble, so he decided to just come back and turn himself in. Now, I'm not sure why Brother Terry was at the hospital. I'm not sure if this was something that his lawyer told him, like, go to the hospital and get checked out or whatever. I'm not really sure. But this investigation all happened pretty quickly. So Monday, June 15th is when the murder took place. And then the fire started the night of the 15th going into the 16th on Tuesday. And then Brother Terry ends up fleeing, but then coming back to Nashville on the 17th, so on Wednesday. And by the 18th is when he was arrested for James Matheny's murder. Detectives say that when Brother Terry was arrested, he had a matter-of-fact kind of demeanor, and he was not showing any emotion or remorse for what he had just done. Now, during the trial, we find out that Brother Terry had complete control over the finances of his specific church that he was the pastor over, but he was supposed to be following the bylaws of the denomination. But he wasn't. He was paying himself even more than what he was supposed to be paying himself. And he was like getting money and then depositing it in the wrong accounts or like moving it around in different accounts and just misappropriating funds for years prior to this even happening. Now, at the trial, Dr. Robert Begtrup had testified. He was a psychiatrist that had evaluated Brother Terry, and he had said that he was not insane at the time of the murder, but that he was suffering from major depression, and that his evaluation showed that he was probably suffering from major depression since his mother died. That was probably the thing that like threw him over the edge and threw him into this deep of a depression. 1988, Brother Terry was tried for capital murder, and at the trial, he actually testified and gave detail to the entire crime in gruesome detail. He even said at one point that James Matheny was his quote-unquote sacrificial lamb. Now, as I'm sure you're probably guessing, yes, Brother Terry was convicted of murder and he was sentenced to die by electric chair in this 1988 trial. But then after that, his trial was overturned because they said that the jury was given improper instruction. And so then Brother Terry ended up getting a new trial. Now, in this trial, I think they were just trying to get the death penalty taken off. But the second jury convicted him of capital murder again and came back with a recommendation of the death penalty. But in a shocking turn of events, Brother Terry would not die at the hands of the state. In 2003, he was in the middle of trying to appeal his case, and his attorneys were actually just about to try to argue for him to get a new trial when Terry hung himself in a bathroom at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, Tennessee. To this day, people still have questions about this case that we will never get answers to because Terry is no longer with us. And James Matheny's head and forearm still have never been found. Now, I would be remiss to tell this entire case without talking about mental health. It is very common that in the 80s, mental health was not something that was talked about, especially in religious circles, even to today. Mental health is not put on priority, and especially not going to see a psychologist or psychiatrist. There are many denominations within Christianity that say that like it is just a demon and that you need to pray more, or it's your fault for feeling depressed. So in my opinion, that is probably some of what was going on, and Brother Terry felt like he couldn't reach out for help and he didn't know how to get out of this. Unfortunately, he just chose a very wrong and sadistic path to try to get out of it. So if you are somebody that grew up within religion that feels like mental health is something that is demonic, or that you can't reach out for, or that you should feel shame for needing help because you feel depressed or you have anxiety, please know that it is very normal and completely okay to seek help from a mental health professional. Your mental health should be a priority. And if you need to take medication, that is absolutely okay. I'm not afraid to admit, I myself am on Zoloft. A couple years ago, I was on Lexapro and then I got taken off, and now we're like, hey, I'm going through some stuff. We had some diagnoses I found out about, and so I needed to be put on Zoloft, and I'll probably be on it for the rest of my life, at least until I hit menopause, because I got diagnosed with PMDD. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but it's basically like PMS on steroids. So if you are struggling with depression, anxiety, or any other mental health struggle, please seek help from a mental health professional. Also, if you find yourself having suicidal thoughts, please reach out to the hotline. I will leave the number right here on the screen for you, and I'll also put it in the description box below. Please reach out. Your life is worth living, and you matter to many people here on this earth. So I learned about this case from the podcast Heaven Bent Season 2. She covers this case and she goes into more detail of the history of Emmanuel Church of Christ and how they got started. And it's very interesting to listen to. So if you want to learn more about that, listen to Heaven Bent Season 2. You can get it where you stream any podcasts. That is all I have for you today. If you guys have any case suggestions, please put them in the comments below. I would love to hear them. Remember, no case next week, but I will see you the week after. Until then, drink some water, go take a nap. Don't be a dick, and have a great day. Love you guys.
Bye.